Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Wednesday stream about everything cannabis across the country. And this week, we're also going to be talking about federal policy. We're going to kick it off with a federal policy update with the awesome Morgan Fox. Let me go ahead and bring Morgan on. While he's giving an update, I definitely encourage all of you guys to drop your questions in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. So go ahead, Morgan, take it away. What's going on up at the Capitol?
Well, it's been a pretty interesting couple of months up here with the 118th Congress finally getting up and running. I can't believe it's already April or close to April, and looking forward to a continuously interesting process up here on Capitol Hill. Let me just start by going into some of the things that have happened relatively recently. So, within the last couple of weeks, the District of Columbia was able to get two measures passed and really under the radar of Congress without any sort of interference. As some of you, I'm sure, know, Congress has the ability to throw a lot of wrenches into the works when it comes to DC residents and DC City Council being able to pass laws that benefit its residents. And a lot of members of Congress who don't live here most of the time like to sometimes use DC as sort of a bully pulpit to get things that their bases like, but that they can't get passed in their own states approved so that they can show their constituents that they're doing something. Luckily, that didn't happen this time. So over the past couple of weeks, we saw two separate pieces of legislation become law. The first is one that helps expedite the process of expunging cannabis-related offenses that people in the district may have received over the years. This is going to be a really good step in the right direction towards undoing some of the harms caused by prohibition in the district, as well as providing people with opportunities to be able to move forward and move on with their lives after an arrest or conviction. The second piece of legislation is a broad expansion of the existing DC medical program. Unfortunately, because of a congressional rider that keeps getting included in the federal budget, the district is unable to regulate cannabis for adults, despite the fact that voters here approved a measure overwhelmingly to make cannabis legal for adults, as well as legalize limited home cultivation. City Council has been trying to regulate cannabis for adult use beyond just the robust medical program that they have for a number of years, and Congress has continuously stood in the way. We're trying to stop that going forward, but in the meantime, City Council has massively expanded the scope of the medical program. It created legislation that allows for a significant increase in the number of cultivation and retail licenses, as well as testing licenses. It enshrined permanently the ability for residents to be able to self-certify, as well as for acceptance of the program for out-of-state patient IDs. And creates a really low barrier pathway for unregulated and legacy operators to become part of the regulated medical cannabis program. So really looking forward to seeing what that does in terms of patient access in the district, both for residents as well as people traveling to the nation's capital for either pleasure or for citizen lobbying efforts, which will be really good news when we start doing a little bit more citizen lobbying through NORML, so that patients won't necessarily have to worry about where they're going to be able to get their medicine or the legality of possessing their medicine while they're talking to their lawmakers in the nation's capital. Moving on, it is appropriations season right now. For those of you that don't know, appropriations is basically when Congress determines what the federal budget is going to look like for the following fiscal year. This is always a time where there are a lot of additional riders and amendments that are suggested on all manner of different topics. And when it comes to cannabis policy, this is a great opportunity for us to help push the window of what is considered to be acceptable policy, as well as get at least temporary relief from some of the issues that we worry about. Two of the things that I'm really excited about in this appropriations round is potentially expanding the protections that have been in law under the previous federal budgets that prevent the Department of Justice from interfering with state legal medical cannabis programs and extending those protections to adult use programs. Now, while the Department of Justice has not really been interfering with adult use programs, that has really just been up to internal policy and the discretion of federal prosecutors. And we'd really like to see that turned into law, even if it's only a temporary law that is in effect for the following fiscal year. It really helps us set a precedent and create a stepping stone to build on for both future appropriations negotiations as well as standalone legislation that would permanently fix some of these problems. We're also really looking forward to the addition of language that would help increase access and protections for the veteran population when it comes to medical cannabis access. This process is ongoing, so we really won't be getting into votes until much later this year. But right now is when a lot of the language that both chambers of Congress consider when entering into these negotiations over the next couple of months. And so we're really excited to have a lot of lawmakers on our side pushing these sort of amendments and riders that can help us make incremental reforms in the absence of being able to pass standalone legislation. I think now would be a good time to get into what the standalone legislation we currently have on the docket is when it comes to the 118th Congress. So far, we've seen a handful of bills be introduced. Obviously, this is not as many as we would like, but I think that it's almost a good sign because almost all of these are bipartisan bills, and traditionally, this has been a relatively low priority issue for Congress. And I think the fact that we're already seeing bills be introduced by members of both parties, as well as the fact that there are currently negotiations ongoing for other legislation that just hasn't been reintroduced yet, is a really, really good sign for getting incremental legislation passed in the current Congress. So first of all, we've got H.R. 363. That's the Second Amendment Protection Act. This basically makes it so that registered medical cannabis patients in states where that is legal will not have to worry about perjuring themselves when they are trying to purchase firearms. Currently, if you are a medical cannabis patient and you check a box on a federal firearms purchase form, that if you check that box saying that you are not a quote user or addicted to illegal drugs, that exposes you to perjury charges at the federal level. So this would actually protect the Second Amendment rights of medical cannabis patients throughout the country. That's something that NORML absolutely supports. There are a number of lawsuits currently underway to try to enshrine that into law as well, but this is standalone legislation that explicitly would protect that. Next up, we've got H.R. 1003, the VA Medicinal Cannabis Research Act. This basically provides for an abbreviated timeline for observational and longitudinal research by the VA about the potential benefits for veterans of being able to access medical cannabis. And then also sets a timeline once that research is done to facilitate more clinical research. This isn't the strongest bill, but it's definitely a step in the right direction and one that NORML supports. This is also the only bill that we've seen so far that has been introduced in both chambers. So the Senate version, S326, has already been approved by the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. So it looks like this bill is going to be moving pretty quickly. Next up, we've got H.R. 394, the Veterans Cannabis for Safe Healing Act. This is another bill that NORML is supporting. This, while not explicitly protecting VA doctors if they want to recommend medical cannabis, does explicitly protect veterans from potentially losing benefits for being medical cannabis patients. Now, again, this is one of those things where the agency in question, the VA, has not been denying benefits for a couple of years now, but that could change with a change of administration or a change in the agency leads. So that's something that we want to get enshrined by law and something that NORML supports as well. The next legislation is only very tertiarily related to cannabis. It's H.R. 1473, the Targeting and Offsetting Existing Illegal Contaminants Act. This is almost exclusively focused on California, and seeks to provide funding to help remediate some of the harms, both environmental and public health related, that are caused by the use of federally banned pesticides in illegal and oftentimes cartel-related cultivation operations on federal land, and also increases the penalties for smuggling those pesticides into the United States. This is something that we support in principle because we are very concerned about the consumer health impacts and environmental damage caused by the use of these banned pesticides in unregulated cannabis cultivation. But we do maintain, and when I'm talking with lawmakers about it, I just like to remind them that the best way to deal with this issue long term is to make the regulated market better able to compete with the unregulated market through things like lower taxes, improved access to financial services, et cetera. Generally lower barriers to entry. But it is something that we are supporting in principle. And the last piece of legislation is the only one that's so far been introduced that NORML does not support. That's HR 610, the Marijuana 1 to 3 Act. This would move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 under the Controlled Substances Act. And just want to make sure everybody on the call understands why we do not support rescheduling, but actually are in favor of descheduling. I will put the link to a document discussing that in the comments section. But really just want to point out that rescheduling would not do anything to resolve the conflict between state medical or adult use laws and federal law, and would probably create significantly more headaches than it would solve. So that's a piece of legislation that we are not supporting. But it is indicative of the fact that there's a lot more recognition on Capitol Hill that Schedule 1 is not the appropriate scheduling level for cannabis. So while we have members of Congress that are talking about rescheduling and descheduling, we also have the Health and Human Services Administration actively looking at a scheduling review process that is currently underway, which was prompted by President Biden last year. Another bill that we're expecting to be introduced tomorrow is the Veterans Equal Access Act, which would explicitly allow VA doctors to be able to recommend medical cannabis in compliance with state laws where it's applicable. That's something that we've been helping out with over the last few years, something that we support absolutely, and something that we hope with bipartisan support is going to be able to make it across the finish line this year. So stay tuned for more information about that. And that pretty much wraps up where we are in terms of federal policy. Stay tuned for more developments over the next couple of weeks and months, and I'll be sure to keep Jax and all of you posted.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Morgan. I did see a question about, is there a deadline by which new legislation needs to be filed at the federal level? What does the timeline look like for how long people can be authoring new bills?
Well, that can happen right up until the last day of the session, but generally, I would like to see as much of the new legislation or reintroductions introduced before we get too close to the 2024 elections, ideally before the end of the calendar year.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for that. And just so everybody knows, if you go to norml.org/act, at the top, we have a couple of federal action alerts that you can participate in. And I've made sure that the fact sheet regarding descheduling and rescheduling is in the comments section below. So thank you so much for joining us, Morgan. We look forward to having you again for the last Wednesday of the month, next month in April. So see you next time, Morgan. Awesome. Thanks so much. Guys, so I've been looking in the comments and I see a couple different places that y'all are watching from. So I am excited to dig in and talk about some of the updates across the country that are going on. So if you want to follow along with me, in the description of the live stream, you will find the blog link from today. So this will be a highlight of new bills that have been filed that are of note, and also moving legislation. And at the end, I will come back and look through the comments and see if there's some states that I may have missed that have some questions about legislation there. So Kicking it off today, let's talk about the big news yesterday in Delaware. As you know, if you've been watching, there's two bills, HB1 and HB2, that have to do with depenalization and a full legalization and adult use cannabis market. Both of these bills have passed both chambers with supermajority support. Woo! Great news. And I want to thank our friends at Delaware NORML and other advocates in the area that have really been continuing to push and put on the pressure. But the bill now awaits action from Democratic Governor John Carney. He has previously expressed opposition to further liberalizing adult use cannabis laws. And so what we are asking of anyone that is watching or anyone that you know that is in Delaware is go to our action alert there, and we have the phone number for Governor Carney's office and a script by which that you can go ahead and give his office a call and let him know that you support these bills. We've also got links to send an email of support. So that action alert will actually send an email to the governor's office. And just so you know a little bit about HB1, it removes all penalties for the possession of a personal amount of cannabis for those that are over the age of 21. Personal use would be defined as an ounce or less of leaf cannabis, 12 grams or less of concentrate, and 750 milligrams or less of Delta 9 THC. Now, for HB2, which is known as the Delaware Marijuana Act, it regulates and taxes adult use sales, promotes equity and inclusion in the legal industry from communities that have been disproportionately impacted by prohibition, and then reinvests a portion of tax revenue into those impacted communities. So a big day yesterday in Delaware. Those supermajority votes were really important, and now we just have to get Democratic Governor John Carney on board. So everybody pick up your phone, call the governor, click the action alert, and send an email to him to let him know that you support this legislation. For those of you that are watching in Maryland, as you know, there's two bills that are an Omnibus Bill that address legalization, because back in November, Maryland actually passed a referendum that instituted a legal cannabis program in the state. The companion bills allow for 21 and up to possess, purchase, and consume cannabis. It also allows select cannabis businesses to serve both medical and adult. The bill creates an avenue for on-site consumption so that people can consume in a social setting. And it also institutes certain parental and personal protections for those that use both medical or adult use. Of note, the bill increases the amount of cannabis that registered medical cannabis patients can possess from up to that sounded weird, 4 ounces of flowers, 36 grams of THC infused products, and up to 4 plants of home cultivation. Right now, patients do not have the opportunity to cultivate plants in their home, so this would be a significant improvement for patients. Now, the House version, HB 556, has passed the House. The Senate version, SB 516, was amended and has passed the Senate Finance Committee. As amended, the Senate bill imposes different tax rates than those approved in the House. Assuming that the Senate floor passes the Senate version, that means that there will be a conference committee to rectify the differences in those bills. So if you are watching from Maryland, definitely go ahead and participate in that action alert there. For our friends in New Hampshire, there is HB 639, which has been amended, but it does allow those 21 and up to purchase, possess, and gift up to 4 ounces of cannabis. It would be regulated by the Liquor and Cannabis Commission, and it would have a tax rate of 8.5%. Now, the news here is HB 639 was amended and passed the House Commerce and Consumer Affairs Committee, as well as the Ways and Means Committee. It now heads to the House floor to be voted on a second time before being considered by the Senate. So we are definitely looking forward to continuing to see that move in New Hampshire. The Senate has always been a heavier lift there. And so it is extremely important that if you are living in New Hampshire or know anyone who does, that you participate in that action alert. Now, I saw someone in the comments talking about the North Carolina bill. And there is a bill, SB 346, that allows adults 21 and up to purchase, possess, and consume up to 2 ounces of cannabis flower, 2,000 milligrams of cannabis packaged products, and 15 grams of concentrated cannabis. Residents may grow and cultivate up to 6 plants. And the bill also outlines an automatic expungement process for individuals previously charged with cannabis possessions felonies or misdemeanor charges. In addition, the bill would create a medical cannabis program in North Carolina. So this bill addresses not only the need for adult use cannabis, but the dire need for access to a medical cannabis program. So if you're watching in North Carolina, this is priority legislation, and we definitely encourage you to participate in this action alert. So I'm going to just real quick come over and check on the comments and get an idea of where all you guys are watching from. I know I saw North Carolina whenever we first kicked it off. We've got Colorado Springs, Pennsylvania, Maryland. Awesome. Welcome. Okay. I see someone talking about Pennsylvania wanting to sell cannabis in state stores. I did see that intent, and we are preparing for that action alert. Of course, there are some issues there with it being provided in state stores, and we are seeing, that same issue in New Hampshire where they're wanting to do the same. But of course, that is not ideal. However, it is of note that in New Hampshire, the liquor is also regulated or sold by state stores. So it would be in line with that, but it would not be in line with some federal guides and regulations. So I see someone also from Nevada. Welcome. I'm going to get back over to our updates and then come back over to the comment section shortly. So there's a bill in California I wanted to highlight, SB 51. It authorizes the Department of Cannabis Control to issue provisional retail licenses for local cannabis equity applicants for up to 5 years if the applicant meets the requirements of the department. This bill has been unanimously passed by the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee. In Louisiana, HB 115 bars discrimination or other adverse consequences initiated by an employer resulting from a positive cannabis test for those who participate in the state medical program. This is, of course, an important employment and patient protection that we want to see instituted. Some more bills are on the move in Maryland. HB 1071 prohibits the odor of cannabis or the suspicion of the possession of cannabis and the presence of money near cannabis from being considered probable cause for police to search a person's vehicle. This bill has been passed by the House, and it is currently scheduled for a hearing in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. Additionally, in Maryland, HB 980 prohibits defendants in pretrial probation and parole proceedings from having their release revoked solely based on the use of their use of cannabis. HB 980 has passed the House Judiciary Committee with amendments and is scheduled for a hearing in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. The last bill I want to touch on in Maryland is SB 653, which protects parents who legally use cannabis from prosecution of child neglect. The bill codifies into law that neglect does not include the use of cannabis by a parent or an individual who has permanent or temporary custody or responsible supervision of the child. This bill has passed the Senate and now awaits action from the House Judiciary Committee. I mentioned last week that we had some Massachusetts bills filed and we had more on the way. So, of course, I covered a few of the newly filed ones last week, and I want to go over some new ones that have been filed since then and the action alerts we've created in conjunction with them. There's 3 bills that deal with expungement. HB 1790 facilitates automatic review and expungement of low-level possession convictions. HB 1787 creates a system of automatic expungement for juveniles and adults currently awaiting trial for marijuana-related charges. Charges related to possession, cultivation, and intent to distribute under the legalized or decriminalized limit would be processed for automatic expungement. HB 1819 creates an expungement procedure for people in the legal system, pretrial and detention process. These individuals who believe the court has failed to properly expunge records created as a result of their criminal court appearance can petition the court for expungement of their conviction. If denied, the court actually has to explain why the petition was denied. So there is an action alert there for you to support these 3 bills. Then there's also in Massachusetts, HB 121, which would permit curbside pickup for both medical and recreational marijuana sales. An establishment wishing to implement curbside pickup procedures has to seek approval from the town or city where they are located. Last bill out of Massachusetts I want to touch on is HB 1955, which protects all employees, prospective or established, from discrimination or retaliation based on their legal use of cannabis. It also prohibits employers from testing their employees without their express consent, and employment may not be hinged on the result of the test, both concerning termination and hiring. Also of note, there is another bill having to do with employment protections that has been filed. We are working to add that to the action alert list, so stay tuned for that next week. I saw someone out of Nevada, and this is a bill out of Nevada, AB 170, which decreases the penalties for minors found in possession of up to 3.5 grams of cannabis concentrates from a felony to a misdemeanor. And then in Washington, we've got HB 1563, which provides protections for medical cannabis users. If passed, qualifying patients would hold a valid authorization, but haven't yet been entered into the database, would not be able to be arrested, and it would give them some protection. This bill has passed the House and was recently approved by the Senate Committee on Labor and Commerce, and now it's heading to the Senate floor. So those of you watching in Washington, there's some tongue twisters today. Why did I do that to myself? Definitely participate in that action alert. There are two bills that I want to talk about that NORML is opposing right now. In Montana, Senate Bill 546 raises the taxes on medical marijuana products from 4% to 20%. I mean, that is a dramatic increase. And it also imposes newer, even lower THC caps on certain extracts and products. This bill is scheduled for a hearing in the Senate Business, Labor, and Economics Affairs Committee. So definitely those of you in Montana, let's oppose this effort. In Oklahoma, SB 440 limits THC potency of medical products and prohibits licensed dispensaries from selling medical marijuana products that exceed those potency limits. The bill has passed the Senate 43-4 and now heads to the House. So definitely help us oppose these arbitrary limits on medical cannabis products. Now, the last bill that I want to talk about that NORML is opposing is out of North Dakota, HB 1202. It sought to cap the THC potency of edible products available via the state's medical cannabis program. But fortunately, this bill failed to pass the House with the required 2/3 majority. So glad to see that legislation is not going to progress. There are two bills out of South Dakota that I want to highlight that have been enacted. That means that Republican Governor Kristi Noem has signed the following bills into law. First is SD1, which is a bit of a mixed bag. It authorizes medical cannabis access to patients that have HIV/AIDS, ALS, multiple sclerosis, cancer, anything associated with chronic pain, nausea, severe vomiting, wasting, Crohn's disease, epilepsy, seizures, and PTSD. However, it limits patients and other third parties from petitioning for the addition of future qualifying conditions, and it would leave it up solely to the legislature. That bill has been signed into law, and SB 3 has been signed into law. It specifically excludes pregnant and breastfeeding women from being issued a medical cannabis card. Of course, there's a recent decision saying that a pregnant and breastfeeding woman did not, neglect or harm her children by using her medical cannabis. These are, thoughtful decisions that a patient and a doctor make together on how they can best treat and most safely treat their patients. And so we need to make sure that we're leaving medicine up to doctors and not up to the legislature. But unfortunately, that bill has been signed into law in South Dakota. So that wraps up what I want to highlight today. But let me come back over to the comments and see where you guys are watching from so we can talk about what actions are going on in your state. So let's go over here. Colorado, I know Colorado mentioned that they are watching, and unfortunately, there's no moving legislation right now. And of course, anyone who's watching right now, if I don't happen to highlight your state because you didn't drop it in the comments, you can go to norml.org/act. There's a dynamic map there. And if you hover over your state, it will pop up all of the action alerts that we currently have active for your state. So I encourage you to do that. Now, in Pennsylvania, I know I saw Pennsylvania here. We have a bill having to do with DUI that is currently filed, and we are expecting a legalization bill to be filed as well. Not sure exactly how it will look, but currently there's discussions of it being a state-run cannabis dispensary type model, which could be very problematic. Now, in North Carolina, I did talk about the adult use and medical bill that was filed, but there's also another bill having to do just with medical cannabis that you can support as well. Let's look over here. Sorry if my screen is moving a little bit. My mouse is still broken and I haven't bought a new one yet. Sorry, guys. All right, let's see. Maryland. Okay, so there are a lot of bills going on in Maryland right now. I talked about, the Omnibus Bill having to do with legalization, but there are also bills having to do with expungement, reciprocity, medical cannabis at healthcare facilities, clarifying possession limits, one that we oppose having to do with THC caps. And then I talked about odor, pretrial, and parental protections as well. So quite a few bills there that you can participate in, my fellow cannabis advocates in Maryland. Nevada. I think I talked about the only bill that is currently filed, but let me just double check. So we talked about juvenile penalty reduction, but there is also a bill having to do with cannabis events that you can participate in. Now in Ohio, there is one bill that we are opposing that has to do with per se limits. So those of you watching from Ohio, tune in there. That's everybody that I see in the comments. So let me go over a few highlights. If you missed the blog post in the description and you want to catch back up, just go ahead and click that link and you can see what are some of our, newly filed bills of note, what are some bills that are moving and what are the updates associated with them, and you can just kind of get your learn on that way. Additionally, if you want to just look at what's going on in just your state and know all the bills, just not the moving bills, you can go to norml.org/act, click on your state in that dynamic map, and all of those action alerts will pop up for you, and you can just click, 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 click. Also, if you have not yet gotten engaged with your local chapter, there are many chapters all across this country, and I encourage you to go to our site, click on the chapters link there, and see if there's one near you. If there's not, there is a process by which you can, create a chapter in that state, and we would love to work with you on that. And then last but not least, I want to remind everyone, NORML is a nonprofit and we are focused on cannabis advocacy and education. And really our main focus is both consumer and patient needs. And we raise all of our funds based on membership dues and donations from you, the public. And so I encourage you to either become a member if you're not one, or become a donor, either one time or a reoccurring donation. And those links are provided there for you as well. So I will be back next Wednesday. Looking forward to talking about more bills that are moving across the country and what you can do to have an impact in your state. So until then, I'm going to bid you guys adieu, and I will see you in a week.